Freeman, and welcome back to another episode of the Steve Freeman Podcast. So good to be here with you. We are in the middle of our 12-step program for musicians, and we are on step number 4. Today is all about courage. So we've admitted that we have an addiction. We admit that we've had a problem. We have hope in changing our direction. Last episode, we talked about faith. Guys, in all honesty, faith is an action word, and it takes courage to put our faith into action. That's going to be the topic. And step 4 of the 12-step program for musicians. Step 4 is courage, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get too deep into it, guys, please subscribe to the podcast no matter where you're listening or where you're watching. Please just subscribe to the podcast so that it's automatically downloaded to your playlist on Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, Radio.com, or anywhere else that you're getting the podcast. If you're enjoying the video version, subscribe to the YouTube channel, give us a thumbs up, and leave a comment. Let us know what you think about this episode and every other episode. And you can find out any information you want about me or the podcast at my website, thestevefreeman.com. Okay, guys, let's jump into it. Last episode, we talked about faith. Faith is important. You got to have faith in the direction that you're going, in this new approach, in the new decisions that you're making to get you heading in the right direction. But guys, faith is an action word, and it takes courage, which is today's step number 4. It takes courage to put your faith into action. Here's how I'm going to talk about this related to the music business. I see all the time artists continually do the same thing over and over and over again. It's almost like they have found faith and security in the process itself instead of finding the correct faith and having the courage to make the decisions that they should be making, or making the right decisions to help them go further. You've heard me talk about in the past what I call music business treadmill. It's where you're doing a lot, but you're not getting a lot done. Well, in order to correct that, you have to have the courage to do things differently. Now, here's an example for you. I see a lot of artists doing a lot, but not getting a lot done. You've heard me talk about seeing artists that are doing the exact same thing today that they were doing 5 years ago, and nothing really changes. They don't really make any progress on their road to achieving their goals. And the reason that is because they just keep making the same decisions. They keep making the same mistakes. Although, you could argue that maybe some of them aren't mistakes, but they're obviously not leading them to where they want to go. So it just keeps them professionally and perpetually in process. It keeps them on the same level. Now, I want to walk through this in a step-by-step process. So let's take an artist. And I'm going to use a country artist here because I have so much experience with this. We're going to talk about the process of a country artist. So you go and you either write or you find the single that you want to put out. You find a producer and you get it produced and you do the vocals. You've got it ready to go. And then you think, okay, I've got to get it out to radio. So you go and you hire an independent radio promoter that's going to promote your single to the Music Row chart because you think and you've been told that that's the proving ground for new artists. And that if you can get charted on the Music Row chart, that if you can get it high enough on the Music Row chart, it'll start to draw attention, and maybe bigger radio stations that report to Billboard or Media Base, then they're going to start playing it. So you send it out, you hire that independent radio promoter for anywhere from $3,500 to $7,500 or more, I've been seeing here lately, to promote your single. You go shoot the video, you hire a video promotions company that's going to charge you $4,500 to $7,500 to promote your video, to CMT, to all of these different video reel services and countdown shows all over the country. And then you go hire this publicist that charges $1,500 to $2,500 a month. And then here you go. Now the independent radio promoter is calling and he wants you to go out, or she wants you to go out on a radio tour. So they start sending you out on a radio tour, and you're spending all this money being out visiting all of these radio stations in secondary markets all over the country. And you think you're making ground. And probably when you do this for the first time, you are making a little bit of ground, because you're doing something you've never done before. You're getting out in front of people that you've never seen before, you've never met before, that have never been exposed to your music or you as an artist. So it's all new and it feels wonderful. It feels great. You feel like you're making momentum. You have yet to realize that you're really just on a treadmill. Okay, fast forward. You are 12 weeks into this program. Your radio promoter and your video promoter are calling and saying, well, we're in the 60s or we're in the 50s on the Music Row chart. That's great for a first single, but it's starting to die out. Stations are wanting to back off of it, and they're not wanting to play it. We don't want to pressure the radio stations because they like you as an artist. So we need to come with another single. So you as an artist are thinking, okay, I'm hoping and I'm having faith in the decisions that I've made, that I've surrounded myself with the right people that are telling me what I need to do. But the price tag that comes associated with making that next step and rinse and repeat is now you got to go record the next song. Or maybe you did an EP and you've already got it. But now you've got to hire that radio promoter again for another $3,500 to $7,500 or more dollars. Now you've got to go shoot another video, and now you've got to hire another video promotions team. And now you've got to keep that $1,500 a month publicist on staff to work that single. And off you go again. And now the radio promoter calls and he wants you to go on another radio tour. So you go back and you see the same program directors at the same stations in the same town. About 12 weeks goes by and the same thing happens again. The independent radio promoter calls and says, well, we're in the 40s this time. We did much better, much because they're getting to know you. We're doing a little bit better. But it's time to come with another single. You get where I'm going? You get comfortable in the process. And you start to misidentify, thinking that just because you're moving forward and you're continuing to do this and you're continuing to be active, that you're actually moving forward when you're actually running in place. And really all you're doing is funding all of these other people, the independent radio promoters, the video promoters. Now listen, I will say that not all of them are bad. There are some good people out there. And if you ever want to know who are the people in this business that I trust, if you're an independent artist and that's who you want to go, contact me directly. And I will be more than happy to point you in the direction of people that I know, people that I trust, people that I know only work with artists who have a program in place and are actually doing things the right way. And they only help and work for artists that they honestly believe they can get to the next level. If you ever want that information, don't ever hesitate to hit me up in the comments section or shoot me an email. Visit my website. You can find out all the information there, and I'll point you in the right direction. But back to what we're saying. You get stuck in this hamster wheel treadmill process of being tricked into thinking that you're doing and making the right decisions when you're really not going anywhere. You're running in place and you're just on that hamster wheel, and you're honestly just spending more and more and more money to get the exact same result. And we all know the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again while expecting a different result or expecting a different outcome. Guys, this is how this business works at the lower levels. We've talked about sharks. We've talked about bottom feeders before, but guys, there are people that prey on you and take advantage of you being perpetually and professionally in process or professionally on the treadmill. I see it all the time. I see people continually to make that same decision over and over and over again. When if you go back to some of the videos that I made a couple of years ago, guys, paying money to work the Music Row chart is a waste of money. It's an absolute waste of money. Those they don't accurately report. They're not monitored. So if you're the songwriter, you're not going to make any money from publishing if those stations are even playing your song. Number two, 90% of the venues that are or cities, markets that report to the Music Row chart do not have venues that you can turn airplay in that local small market into a live show. So are you so desperate to see your name on a chart that doesn't matter just so you can point to it and say it's there? That ought to be the first indication that you are heading in the wrong direction. You're doing this for the wrong reason, and you don't have an adequate plan in place. Guys, the Music Row chart is irrelevant, 100% irrelevant. The stations on it that actually are in mid-tier, let's say, not major, none of them are major or large market, which are really the only stations that matter when it comes to drawing attention to yourself. They're all small market and some medium market radio stations. Now, I'm not saying anything bad about those radio stations. Those are some of the best radio stations in the country because they're not corporately owned. You're only going to get airplay on stations that are privately owned. You're not going to get airplay on stations that are corporately owned by like iHeartRadio or Cumulus or CBS or any of those because they have mandates, corporate mandates that tell their program directors and do not allow their program directors to play independent music, to play independent artists. So the only airplay you're going to get comes from stations that the independent radio promoter you've hired, you've paid, have a direct relationship with. It has nothing to do with the value of your song or how good it is or how good you are as an artist. It's 100% relationship. So if you hire this independent radio promoter and you throw this single out there, you're going to get added to the playlist of those stations that promoter has a direct relationship with. The best you're going to do is maybe the top 40. Sometimes you might get into the top 30 after you've released 5 or 6 or 7 singles and you've spent $50,000. You might get into the top 30, but you'll never go very far beyond that because the stations that make up the top 10% of that chart are all corporately owned. So you have to know what you're getting involved with, and here is where courage comes into play. You have to have the courage to look around and acknowledge that what you're doing isn't working, but more importantly, have the courage to look at those things, realize that they've been mistakes and they were misleading. And then most importantly, have the courage to make new decisions. Have the courage to start and head in new directions. We all find comfort in the process. We all think that, well, we've done this, we know how to do this, we're going to just rinse and repeat. We're going to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting the same result. So you honestly get into a position where you're a little crazy and maybe a little insane because you are expecting a different result from doing the things that you find comfort in. Sometimes having faith and having the courage to head in a different direction, matter of fact, most of the time, it's uncomfortable. It's scary. You can't see the end destination. We've talked about that. It is the road less traveled. So you don't get that safety and that security that sometimes doing the same thing over and over again makes us feel. There's a reason why some people have 9-to-5 jobs, right? You and me, we're creative people. We don't understand that. We don't get that. But the reason that a majority of people have a 9-to-5 job is because it's safe, because it's secure, because for the most part, they don't have to worry about the decisions they make affecting their livelihood. They clock in and they clock out. And as long as they do their job halfway well and they show up, they're going to be okay. It doesn't take much courage to clock in and clock out. But for creatives, it's much, much, much different. We don't clock in and we don't clock out. We are constantly in process. We are constantly trying to make right decisions that help us move forward, that help us get to the next level. But it is so important that we make sure that while we're doing that, we're making the right decisions. Even more importantly than that, we also have to know when we've made a wrong decision. And that, my friends, takes courage. Changing directions, admitting that things that you've done in the past haven't worked. And instead of making a decision to just try it again, you need to have the courage to try something different. Head in a different direction. Head in a direction that makes you uncomfortable, that gives you a complete lack of security, and that forces you to step outside of your comfort zone. Talking about it, thinking about it, having faith in it is not even enough. You have to have the courage to actually stop, turn around, and head in a completely opposite direction. You cannot continue to do the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result. You can't keep in that process of doing independent radio promotion, thinking that at some point it's going to lead to you getting on large market radio stations. It's not going to happen. You can't think that working the music row chart and being at number 50 is somehow going to change your life. It's going to mean something. It doesn't. I see you guys, and I'm not saying you, but I see artists all the time get on Facebook, Instagram, and just touting, and we're up 4 spots to number 52 on the music row chart. Great. Those of us that know this business know that is no accomplishment. For $5,500, anybody can. I could go pull my Kevin, my barista at Starbucks. I could go pull him out of the counter. I could put $7,500 into him. We could record a single. We could put it out. I could record a video, and I could have him at number 41 on the music row chart in 12 weeks. Stop finding comfort and satisfaction and that feeling of accomplishment in things that don't matter. Have the courage to chase down the things that matter and stop being repetitive. Get off of the music business treadmill. Stop doing the same things over and over and over again, expecting a different result. Have courage. Step outside the box. Find a different way. And have courage in your conviction to change directions. Guys, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Steve Freeman Podcast. We are 4 steps into the 12-step program for musicians. I hope you're getting something out of it. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're listening on Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, radio.com, Google Podcast, wherever. Subscribe so that every episode is automatically downloaded to your playlist. If you're enjoying the video version of the podcast on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up button, and leave us a comment. Leave a review. Tell us what you think. Tell us where you are. I try to respond to as many comments as I possibly can. Matter of fact, I think I'm doing pretty good. I think I'm responding to everybody. If you want to work with me, you want a one-on-one coaching session, mentoring session, you want to read my blog or become a subscriber that's totally free to my weekly newsletter, The Revolution, it's absolutely free. You can find out all that information on my website, thestevefreeman.com. Guys, thank you for being here for another episode. And as always, keep being creative. Keep pressing the boundaries. And there's nothing wrong with being independent. See you in the next one.